let me go back to, many apologies. You know, the rains have started. Can you hear me now clearly? Is the network stable?
It is stable.
This is better.
Okay, sorry. You know, it started raining, so the network since yesterday has been quite shaky. So we were done pointing out the research problem. I think the next thing, what I asked for was, I forget the assignment. I'd asked for research problem, research method, research approach. Yeah. Was that right?
Objective.
The objective.
Had I asked for objective? Let me just go back to that slide and see. Yes, the research objective. So the research objective automatically is the proposed solution. What the researchers then propose, and I think we can see here already the project involved the introduction of a groupware application called Lotus Notes to facilitate communication and collaboration among the senior management of a tertiary institution in New Zealand. Yeah. And that was the objective, but the objective was primarily they did that primarily to understand more fully the relationship between the introduction of a groupware application and changes in work habits. So for one to point out what is the research objective, it was to introduce the groupware application to facilitate communication with the primary purpose of understanding more fully the relationship between the introduction of the groupware and the changes in the work habits of the organization. So far, does that make sense in relation to the research problem?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, so the objective was not to facilitate. Yes, of course, that was the organization objective, but they implemented it to facilitate, but then it was to fully understand the relationship between introducing the groupware and changes in work habits. That was the objective of the research. And then the other question was the research approach. What was the research approach? And here, I will go back to things that we talked about in terms of research approach. How do we know what our research approach is? Is it qualitative, is it quantitative? Or is it mixed? Mixed method, we haven't yet talked about it in detail. We shall talk about that hopefully tomorrow. What is our research approach in this case? When you see things like the statements made within the research, which say things like to understand, to try and understand, meaning there is something that's not yet understood, but we are going out to explore. Okay, you hear those key terms, that you're trying to understand something. Then you know that research is leaning towards a qualitative approach. This one is trying to understand a phenomena. It's trying to understand a relationship. So this research approach, one would say, is a qualitative approach. That's one. That's a qualitative approach. We are supposed to look at research methods, but we shall see certain research methods are very much tied to particular research approaches. So even for someone just to see action research, then automatically this one is a qualitative study.
Sorry, Doctor. How would it sound like if it were quantitative? Like, how would the statement go like?
Now, how would the statement go like?
Yes.
You remember in last week's discussion, we said that if there is an assumed relationship, then that is quantitative. For example, if I say something like, if in the writings the authors are saying something like, or are insinuating that they say something like a negative attitude of ICT will negatively affect adoption. That is automatically assuming a relationship. There's already an assumption being made. So that one basically is just going to prove or disprove that statement. Giles, have you understood? But this people's statement is not making any assumptions. They want to more fully understand. They want to understand. But if I'm saying that something either causes something or it doesn't, that means I'm either going to prove or disprove.
Okay.
Yeah. So
it's some bit of assumption or imagination.
If there's an assumption
or a theory.
Exactly.
Theory.
If especially if you're starting with a theory that is already making an assumption about a cause towards something, then that means that is a quantitative study.
Okay.
That is one. Two, also look at the method that was employed. This was a study being done in one organization using action research. If it was a quantitative study, you'd be looking at a wider study area, maybe the whole of New Zealand. But this was specifically focused on one specific organization, which means this is qualitative in nature. They are looking for richness of data, rich data. I don't know if I'm making sense, or it's getting clearer, or you're getting more confused.
No, a lot of sense. It's getting more clearer.
Okay.
Thank you.
So when something is seeking to understand, that is qualitative. That's a qualitative approach. But if it's making an assumption, it's simply trying to prove or disprove the causality of something, then that means that's quantitative in nature. Yeah. If case in point, if you can go back and look at the paper on multitasking, that is a quantitative study. Okay. Next thing I wanted us to point, the method. The method in this case is action research. Yeah, they clearly point it out in their topic. I think they discuss it later on in this paper. They talk about this is the theoretical framework, or this is the theories they use to try and understand. So here they talk about research method, and I think they already pointed out that they are using action research. So it's pointed out, they talk about the organization, they talk about implementation, and so on and so forth. What you can do to defend your work is you can actually quote the page where they state that the research method they chose to use itself. So they use action research, but they also use something else. They also use is case study method. Although we haven't looked at research methods, we shall go through them today. Some of the more prominent research, there are many. Some are even just emerging, more so to speak. But what I'll discuss are the most prominent and the ones which you're most likely going to use. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what this paper. This is how you'd answer using this particular paper. Joshua, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor, for enlightening on this. I was inquiring that what if I also say that grounded research theory was also used as a method in this, because I'm seeing they are basing on various theories as if to come up
with a
okay. Yes.
Now, Joshua, what I would say is what you're seeing here is the theoretical framework they used. Yeah, that's not grounded theory. Grounded theory is you coming up with a theory from scratch. Now we shall talk about theoretical framework. We shall talk about theoretical framework, especially in research design. Yeah. When you, again, depending on your research approach, the nature of your problem, if, let us say, I want to go and understand something, I'll give you the example of my research. My research, which was leaning towards qualitative, I was seeking to understand the developing context, a rural developing context in relation to M-health applications and sustainability. Okay, so I was seeking to understand. Now, you don't just go to understand something just like that. Take an example. If, let us say people in healthcare, if they are treating a certain disease, they must use some kind of knowledge to understand. For example, general practitioners have a certain, should I say, methodology they use to understand something. Is it some theories they begin to use? Those who are treating cancer, it's something else. Those who are treating communicable diseases use something else. Those who are using non-communicable diseases use other theories. So in other words, you use, if you're seeking to understand something, especially something you don't understand, you must have some kind of theory to guide you. So now for my case, I was trying to understand a developing context. So what did I do? I went to the field of development studies to give me theories to understand. Okay, and I picked specifically, a theory called livelihood framework to help me understand what is of value to the poor in a rural context. What is of value? So that theoretical framework basically gives you guidelines that about how to seek out what is of value. That is one. Two, I needed to understand sustainability. Yeah, and for that I went to business models. But more specifically, I needed to understand sustainability of an M-health or a mobile application. So I went to a theory or a framework called STOF, which is Service Technology Organization Finance. So it was basically a framework which guides you on what is financially sustainable. So in other words, these two things, STOF and livelihood framework, something from development studies and another from the mobile business model field, this became my theoretical framework to understand the relationships between these two. This became my theoretical framework so that I use them to go and study the context and come out and say, this is of value to somebody in a rural context, and this is what will make it sustainable financially. That became my theoretical framework because I was seeking to go out there and understand. Okay? Joshua, so far have I made sense?
Yes, Doctor. I've understood it very well because when I tried to go through, I didn't see any theory. But
Okay.
I think you also need to elaborate on qualitative and inductive, because
Yeah,
now
we shall discuss all those when we're doing research design. We shall discuss those. That's why I didn't ask you about theoretical frameworks, what theoretical framework do they use or not. But, however, just on the other side, if it is quantitative, what you would find would be a conceptual framework. Why? Because with quantitative research, your research problem, you start making an assumption using a theory. Okay? You start making an assumptions, and those assumptions then they have specific concepts. They tell you this affects this. This is dependent on this. So you'd find for a quantitative research, you'd most likely find a conceptual framework. You'd find a theory which guides your hypothesis, which guides your hypothesis, but not a theoretical framework. Kalule, do you have a question?
Yes, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. Still on research approach, Doctor, you said when you find things like to understand, to explore, then just know that it is they used a qualitative approach. Now, how about if you find the main objective is to assess, for example, the role of mobile health technology and something like that. So that one, what could be the approach?
Now, I would probably have to look at the research problem in detail. I would have to look at the research. You have to read something in its entirety. So I wouldn't just look at the objective and know. Judging from that to assess, I would probably think that is a descriptive research, and it may employ both quantitative and qualitative. So it may have mixed method. For me, I would say I would want to look at the entirety of the research problem.
Okay, Doctor.
Be able to make judgment on what exactly the research approach that is being employed. Any other question?
I think we can continue, Doctor.
Okay, so let us, let me stop sharing and pick something from, pick something from ICT. So I'm going to look at the framework for evaluating compliance. So here, if we just go through the abstract as well, let's go through the abstract and see. So it says, in the context of public government, Enterprise architecture means a way of systematic description and planning of cross-sectional services. This is done by aligning existing resources with information and communication technology investments to ensure national and international interoperability. So this is where I was talking about enterprise architecture. It's there essentially to align, to see that ICT is aligned towards the organization objectives. Now here, but specifically they talk about interoperability, yeah? Interoperability, that you can easily transfer or rather allow communication between systems. So they continue, they say governing interoperability across organizational domains requires that public agencies take into consideration other parts of public sector and engage to causes of action that are commonly agreed upon. As many of the intra and intersector information, or rather ICT initiatives, seem to still end in trouble, the panacea considered is government enterprise architecture. GEA work is in the agenda of many governments. However, the successful implementation of such programs has been problematic. Yeah, successful implementation of GEA programs has been problematic. In this paper, we describe the nature of public sector transformation with GEA. So here, the objective is to describe. Yeah, so it's not an implementation, it's a description. So this is a descriptive research. So already we are seeing that is the objective. The objective is to give readers, or give the community, the research community of this in enterprise architecture and public sector. They want to describe to them the nature of public sector transformation with GEA. Based on the findings from the first round of Finnish interoperability program developing the GEA and our follow-up research, we identify areas of improvement. So basically this research, the objective is to point out areas which need to be researched. That is the objective of this research, meaning this area is quite new, and they are embarking on a descriptive research whose agenda is objective at the end is to point out areas that need to be improved, where there can be implementations, maybe of frameworks, of models and things like that. After that, we analyze governance model for GEA compatibility program initiatives. We propose a tentative framework for evaluating public service development programs, compliance with GEA. So at the end of it, they propose a framework. They describe, they point out areas which need to be improved, and then they propose a framework. They propose a framework. So this is essentially one thing I can already tell. It's a research that is design oriented. I can already tell that. Two, it is qualitative, more or less qualitative in nature, because it is exploring and describing. So it's designing an artifact, and two, it is descriptive in nature. So let us try to see where the problem area might be. But we can already tell that they have not understood the nature of GEA. It's a relatively new area. We can already tell that's a relatively new area, and they are seeking to describe. It's a descriptive research. Already we can tell from that area. So let us start with the introduction. The archetypal public administration is hierarchical, is a hierarchically organized bureaucracy. where the responsibilities are clearly divided within ministries, administrative subject fields. Initiatives are proposed to civil servants who push the decisions higher on the organizational ladder. So let's come to the ICT part. The digital era poses challenges to the public administration. Citizens are ICT literate, and they are growing, and they are to a growing extent having access to public information at their fingertips. Yet, because the public administration by definition is for all, the civil servants are mediating the citizens' initiatives between the forms and decision makers within their silos. However, under growing cost pressures and the changing citizen capabilities, most governments attempt to modernize their operations, citizen interfaces, and introducing self-service with the help of ICT. We're finally seeing that the use of ICT tools and applications is leading to transformational shifts. There's calls for more efficiency and streamlined public administration mean that more and more often administrative burden to citizens and other shareholders, such as private sector, blah, 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 count. Against this backdrop, it becomes crucial to optimize the burden of administrative processes from different stakeholders. Hence, this leads to redesign of public sector as a whole. So then let's move forward. They're still giving a background. Governments are simultaneously trying to improve the service delivery and efficiency of government function. This requires rethinking the role of ICT by increasingly looking towards e-government, blah, blah, blah. Then enterprise architecture is a hierarchical approach for aligning businesses and ICT. It describes how the information system processes, units, and people in organization function as a whole. Some prerequisites for ideal seamless service delivery are free-flowing information between authorities, power to change processes across administration areas, and new service concepts, which are implemented in efficient ways. All of this is just blah, blah, blah. Hence, GEA programs face challenges related to integration and interoperability within and between public agencies. Overcoming these challenges is found to be difficult. Government structures often impede GEA programs from succeeding. This is the issue that they are trying to bring about, the issue of interoperability within and between public agencies. Interoperability within and between public agencies. Now, we've already talked about, they have already talked about enterprise architecture, how it aligns, and they're talking about specifically the issue of interoperability between public agencies. Now, we've already seen from the abstract that they first of all sought to describe, point out the areas that need improvement, and then they propose a framework for evaluation. Yeah, this one, I think it was most likely a PhD study, but it really points out quite a number of areas that they're looking at. But the main issue is interoperability between sectors. And they even point out research where they found that problem. So where it was published, where the research was actually done, and they pointed out that particular research problem. Okay, so this was not observed. Probably it was observed, but they went ahead and looked for where somebody had actually brought out that research saying that there's an issue of interoperability within and between public agencies. So they go ahead to, first of all, do a descriptive study and then propose a framework for evaluation. Okay, in an attempt to close that gap. Now, if someone, let's say, if someone was doing research in the field of ICT, if I was a person doing research in the field of ICT and I found this framework, For me, what I would do is come and implement that framework and propose and either validate it to say whether the same things exist in Uganda or not, or propose changes to it to suit Uganda. That's what I would do. For me, this paper actually proposes suggests a solution which can be implemented in Uganda. So far, are we making sense? I know coming from an IT background, we're expecting a system, but instead we're hearing frameworks.
I have a question, Doctor.
Yes, please.
Now, when you look at this document here, it's more of they're trying to, let me say, they're trying to analyze how these different public government agencies can be able to work seamlessly using ICT, not so?
Yes.
In your opinion, what is the problem we're trying to look for here? The research problem we're looking for here?
Here, I think they state it clearly. They say policymakers and government and GEA programs ensure interoperability. No, that's not. They are supposed to ensure interoperability, avoiding duplication, and enable government-wide reuse. Hence, GEA programs face challenges related to integration and interoperability within and between public agencies. So the issue is the issue of integration and interoperability between, specifically for GEAs. Yeah, that is the research problem. The issue of interoperability in the context of government agencies. And they quote, for them, they even reference somebody who pointed out this research problem. Now, Kenneth, one of the things I want to point out is this particular research is in the field of ICT, and in the field of in the program of ICT. And in the program of ICT, we don't look at systems. Okay, yeah, we're looking at system, but we look at governance of ICT. Okay, governance of ICT. Unlike IS, which looks at building systems, actual digital systems, this one looks at this. You have these ICTs within organizations, but their governance and management of ICT. So that's why they are talking about things like interoperability, because that is a governance issue or a management issue. Integration and interoperability. In other cases, you will see research in terms of alignment. So whereas in IS, you'd be looking at the relationship between an instance and an organization. You'd be looking at things like human-computer interaction. You'd be looking at things like cybersecurity and things like that. Here you're looking at any issues related to governance and management. So that's why you find a proposed solution is a framework.
Okay, Doctor. Thank you for this clarification.
Doctor, I can
Doctor.
get you now.
Okay. You're now getting me?
Excuse me.
Yes, please.
Doctor, I have a question.
Yes, Vincent.
My understanding of framework was looked in frameworks such as TOGAF and COVID. So in this context, when you talk of a framework, from this document, if someone asked me to point out a framework, would that question make sense, or we can actually point out a framework from this document.
Now, this document, you see where somebody, an IS student would create a system or an application, an ICT student would, their artifact would be a framework or a model.
Okay.
So the framework would be the new knowledge you're bringing forward.
All right.
Yeah, this would be the new knowledge. Now you talk about something like TOGAF. Now TOGAF is actually a framework that was a framework developed within the field of enterprise architecture.
Yes.
It's an established framework that was developed under enterprise architecture, and it's a tool that can be used to align, to look at interoperability and so on and so forth. So it's a tool that can be used. So it can actually be a part of a theoretical framework that a researcher, an ICT researcher is using together with something else maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so in actual sense, Vincent, maybe an ICT researcher can use it to develop another framework for a specific context. So let us say maybe there's somebody who would like to develop a framework for aligning e-learning to an institution of higher learning's business processes.
Yes.
Yeah, so they combine, they use that, they use it as a tool to develop another tool or to design another tool. Have you got my point, Vincent?
Yes, I get it, Doctor.
Okay, okay. So now let us look at the next question would be the research objective. So I think their research objective was description. Yeah, I think that was their research objective. 2, the other one was the research approach, because it's descriptive and it's for a specific context. It is their research approach is let's see, look at for their methods, let's look for their research method first. But research method, I already know what it is. It's design science. Yeah, because they came up with an artifact. So that one is design science. I don't know if this paper actually talks about research method. Let me see. It doesn't point out, but just from my experience of research methodology, I can tell you that it's already design science that was used. Research approach, because it's descriptive in nature, it's a qualitative research approach, but most likely I think they also used some mixed methods along the way. Any questions so far?
It is fine, Doctor.
Okay. What I would advise is, if you want to look at a quantitative research type, look at the multitasking article. That one is a typically quantitative research approach. Now, let me stop sharing. The other thing I wanted to point out were sources where you could go and look for articles which you can evaluate for yourselves. So let me share again. So start with Google. Yeah, start with Google. One, I would say do something like IS research journals. If you want to be very specific. And let me see, I think there was some which yes, and ICT. These are just some of them. You can look for, you can just go through some of these. And they should bring out just some research that is being done. Although these ones are paid for, there were some which I had found previously. Research. Let me see. Sage is one of them. Just Story is another. This one has also quite a number of free articles. And some of them, these you can access through UMU. I think those which I had found,
If I may, Doc, if I may say something.
yes, please.
Yes, Doctor, I just maybe as a suggestion also, we were walked through, maybe I don't know what your view is in comparison to what you're sharing. We were walked through how to use the Uganda Librarians Consortium.
Okay, okay.
And we're given databases that are specific to IS and ICT. So
Okay,
there was
so
a session
there you
that
go.
was
Okay.
there was a session that was run by the librarian and we are kind of guided on a number of databases that speak directly to ICT and IS. So maybe that could also be as a source that as a class we also consider.
Okay. So okay, the other option is go to Google Scholar. So with Google Scholar, you can basically type in a research area of your interest. For example, if you said mobile applications and human computer interaction, and you find out any research that has been done in that area. Look at the dates. If you we talked about state-of-the-art research, so look at the dates of publication. They should be able to tell you something that how recent the research is. There are also suggestions. For example, this one is on mobile devices and human-computer interaction, mobile health interventions, computer interactions, and so on and so forth. So you can re-edit your rather narrow down your research depending on what you want. Those where the Google Scholar gives you a PDF, that means that article is freely available. So here is something on enhancing human-computer interaction and design education. And you can decide to download it, and that's the article you're going to focus on. Read through it and see if it is worth it. Yeah. Two, another nice thing about using Google Scholar is if you want to cite the article you've got, simply click on the word that says cite, and then pick. It will give you all the formats that are that are available. So UMU uses Harvard. You can decide to copy and paste. So it gives you the citation and the format without you struggling to go through a particular format and disturb yourself a lot. So you can either use that or APA, one of those, and just copy and paste. Yeah. So far, is that okay?
Yes.
Can you comfortably do your assignment now?
Yes, Prof. Yes, Doctor.
We can try, Doctor, I think.
Okay.
Maybe, Doctor, you can just the questions of the assignment, what we're supposed to do, just clarify that. And then I was also here checking online, and I managed to get like 2 sources. One is sciencedirect.com. I don't know whether it is free. And then there is another one called pubmed.government. I think this one is like for people who are in the medical field. Let me just share the links here, such that those guys who are there can be able to look at it and see. Maybe you can just open the link and then you show the rest of the colleagues.
Okay, where have you shared?
I'm going to put it here in the group as a message for everyone.
Okay, then in the meantime, let me just share the question again. It's on the slides. I'm just going to change the dates. So this, since now we've changed dates, it's going to, I'm going to put up this article. I know I won't be able to do it at the end of this lecture because my router will be done. I'll put it up tomorrow morning, 17th. And submission should then be, presentation should be on the 23rd, next Friday. The other thing, this was supposed to be done in groups. I've not yet received a list of the groups. Are you all just getting to know each other?
Doctor, we formulated some groups for the ICT class.
Okay.
So we will be sharing those. Our class representative will share those.
Okay. And IS?
Dr. IS as well created groups, and I think all of us are in groups. Some are 6, others are 5.
So please just share those groups so that I can put them in Moodle. That way that when you submit as a group, when I mark your group mark goes to you as well.
Understood, Doctor. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so shall we go to the lecture? Shall we begin the lecture?
Yes, Doctor, begin the lecture.
Okay. The slides are already on Moodle, so you can access them. So today we are going to look at research methods. As for the sake of clarity, we'll say research strategies, but this is what we are going to look at today. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Yes, Doctor.
Okay, we are going to go through some of the common research methods and just try to understand them. And as I discuss them, I'll relate them to the research approaches. So I'm going to start with the most commonly known survey, the survey research method. So this particular research method is highly quantitative in nature. If we're dealing with any data that needs to be quantifiable, data which can be, the variables can be numbered, and where we also have correlations and causations. This is when surveys come in. Yeah, this is when surveys come in. So it's a typically quantitative research method. So surveys focus more on naturally occurring phenomena. So anything to do that deals with measurement. For example, if we want to find out, let's say, a performance of girls in secondary schools from a particular income background. Yeah, from a particular income background. Girls who come from households with a particular income level, and in relation to their performance in schools, specifically in secondary schools, and of a particular age. So there we are already seeing that we want to talk about income levels. We want to talk about income levels. We want to talk about, we are talking about, let me put the $ here, income levels, and in terms of, in relation to gender, let me use G, and specifically female, if you are female. And specifically secondary, we're talking about secondary schools, use SS. So here we are talking about, we're talking about something that is measurable. The number of girls who are from particular households and of a particular age group, that means in secondary schools. So we're talking about teenagers in general. So we're talking about something that naturally occurs, something that's a naturally occurring phenomena. That's when surveys become important. Now, because we're talking about numbers, because we're talking about specifically numbers, we want to be as wide as possible in our research area, as wide as possible, okay? We want to make a conclusion that can be generalized. So we want to be as wide as possible in our research area. So we probably want to look at income, girls maybe who are from Kienjojo district, girls who are from Bundubujo, girls who are from Dokolo district, girls who are from Kisoro district, girls who are from Wakiso. We make a selection from all areas, from as many people as possible, so that our response at the end of what the result we give can be generalized to all girls who come from specific homes, and who come from a specific household, from a specific income. That the result at the end will say either girls from this side perform badly, perform poorly, or it doesn't matter which home you come from. It actually indicates that there are those who perform well and that there are those who don't perform well. Okay, we want a generalization. So survey data is already, from our discussion, is largely quantitative in nature. The primary data is quantitative. Although we can use qualitative methods, but most of the time survey data gives us quantitative data. Now, the key, because we are dealing with quantitative data, one of the key things with survey method is sampling. Sampling is extremely important. Many times when you're seeing somebody writing their research, everyone wants to talk about sampling, but you find in some cases, sampling is actually not necessary. For example, if you're doing ethnographic research, you don't really need to sample sometimes. But a few times in qualitative research, you may need to talk about sampling, but with quantitative research, sampling is extremely, extremely important. Yeah. Because you want to collect information that can be generalized to the entire population, it may not be possible to interview, or rather give a questionnaire to all the population, to that entire population. It's not possible. So you need to sample a particular part of that population. Key point here to note is that the bigger your sample size, the better, the more chances you get to generalize. Now, survey research can also be classified. It can be exploratory, it can be descriptive, it can be explanatory. Yeah. Now, someone might say, but we already said exploratory research is qualitative in nature. That is true. That is very true. Let me give you an example where a survey was used. Specifically, that was my research, which was largely qualitative. I had a case study area, specifically in Nindye parish, and I was more specifically focused on healthcare, where I spent a period of 2 years with the healthcare section of that parish. That is the healthcare facility, the healthcare workers, the VHTs, and a few members of the village community. Now, I spent time in focus group discussions, in interviews, in workshops, just listening to them, and then also during training sessions. And in that time, I discovered several variables. Yeah, several variables. For example, literacy levels, mobile literacy levels, or the age of mobile phone users affecting the ability to effectively use a mobile phone. But at the end of it, I decided to administer a questionnaire, which was a mini survey to all the VHTs, yeah, all the village health team members. I decided to give that, but to administer that questionnaire with the sole purpose of ascertaining that the variables I saw during the focus group discussions, during the workshops, during the interviews, during all those times I just sat with them doing trainings, are they truly present? So my questionnaire was more or less to explore. I would ask questions like, do you own a mobile phone? How frequently do you use it? Things like that. So that survey was exploratory in nature. So even a survey can be used in a qualitative context. A survey can also be used for descriptive purposes, to try and get to understand what makes up a certain context or a certain phenomena. So also my case, I was exploring, but at the same time I was trying to describe a rural context and a rural mobile phone user. Okay. But primarily, most of the time, surveys are found in explanatory. Yeah. This is when we are trying to look at causality in relationships. That is when our research is explanatory in nature, trying to understand the cause of something, or trying to emphasize the relationship of one variable to another. This is when it is purely quantitative in nature. A survey research method can also be classified in time. That means if you remember the onion, the research onion we had, we said that research can be cross-sectional or longitudinal. Now, cross-sectional is when we want to collect data for a specific period in time from a large population, a larger population. Take an example. Uganda Bureau of Statistics usually has those collects data, cross-sectional data to find out, let's say, what are the income levels of Uganda between 2019 and 2022 when we've been hit by the COVID pandemic. That is cross-sectional. Or even just for today, for now, what are the income levels of people in 2022 when we've been hit by after that we're coming out of the pandemic, when we're being affected by the Ukraine and Russia war, things like that. That would be cross-sectional for this particular period in time. Longitudinal would be when we're doing studies that you sample particular populations and you try to study them. And I think I gave examples where there were studies being done of children as they grew within from the time of 1 year to 5 years. So those are longitudinal studies. Okay, so a survey can also collect you that kind of information. And I think I also pointed out Uganda Bureau of Statistics collects quite a bit of data, and you can get longitudinal surveys, actually survey data from them, because they collect data over periods of time. For example, we may want to know what were income levels of people in Kampala in the 90s in comparison to now in the 2000, in the 1900s and also in the 1990s and in the 2000s, 2020 and so on and so forth. What were the income levels? Now, because UBOS has survey data that it collects, so you can also get that kind of information. So survey, so the survey method can also be used in relation to time. The data collection approach or method, we normally we can do face-to-face. So I gave you the example of the research I did where I collected, I administered a questionnaire to VHTs. So we actually sat in a workshop, we administered the questionnaire, and we started asking them, for this question, there is this option, this one, tick this one. If it's your answer is this, tick this. If your answer is this, tick that. That was face-to-face. There are also situations where you can have a questionnaire and you have the participant in front of you and you fill out the questionnaire. This particular approach you use, let's say if the person may be hard to find, the participant, and you want them to answer your questions immediately. There are also, like in my situation where my questionnaire was in English, and I thought, if I ran the risk of changing it to Luganda, there was a high chance that I was going to misinterpret something. So what we did with my research assistant was to have the people there in face-to-face, and we question the person. We go question by question, and the participant gives you their response, and you tick the answer. The other format is by mail, sending a questionnaire through email. Others use the telephone, but the most popular now is web survey. Yeah, that is the most popular now, where somebody creates a questionnaire and can either use Google Forms or use something else like Monkey Survey, and you send the questionnaire to people through their email. Someone responds, and the responses are automatically you automatically receive them in a database. So the survey approach also, that it has a research approach that one can use. We shall not go through it in detail because I'm going to go through quantitative research approach. because we have several research methods we want to go through. First of all, the research process starts with a research problem. We design, that's how we begin to design the survey. We acquire a sample. We then implement or administer our questionnaire. We collect the data, we present the results. Yeah. So everything starts with a research question, or in other words, sorry, a research problem, which would pose a research question. We determine the population we want to study from. Do we want to, the population wants to, is it people from a particular age group or a particular income group or a particular context? We sample. That means there are certain mathematical equations that can be used to sample, and you decide the number of people who that are representative of this population. You design your research, your questionnaire. You can design it, or you can use an existing questionnaire. Take an example. I'll give you an example. If someone is, maybe if a researcher is using term as their basis, there are questionnaires which already, which are already designed based on term. So you can design your own, yes, but there are also pre-existing questionnaires which you can use. Content, the knowledge of how much knowledge is existing. So of course, by the time it's a survey, we want to know again, is it descriptive? Is it exploratory? Is it descriptive? Is it explanatory in nature? So that will determine the kind of survey that you are going to have. Biases, these are another issue we must consider as we give out our survey. Is there a possibility that there's going to be a bias in responses? The cost and time, equipment of coming up with your questionnaire. Survey is one of actually the cheapest research methods that you can find, and also the least time consuming. In terms of designing a questionnaire, it can be laborious, but if you have an existing questionnaire, it is okay. But in terms of cost, in terms of time, it's one of the easiest. I remember one time Eddie saying that doing quantitative research can be time consuming. It's actually can be one of the things that is least time consuming, because if all goes well, let's say you send your questionnaire out to maybe your 300 respondents and all of them respond within a month or two, then you're good to go within a month or two. But imagine trying to study an application that you have implemented within a certain context. This, for you to get real results, it may take more than 3 months, maybe even 4 or 5 months to get real results. Yeah, to find out the relationship between the instance you've implemented and the context itself. Some things may take time to get an honest response from the respondents. Any question on survey before we move to the next research method?
Not really, everything is clear.
Okay. The next quantitative type of research method is the experiment. Again, I would guide you to the multitasking article. It's a good example of the experiment research method. So this one examines conditions in a controlled environment. Yeah, in a highly controlled environment. Now, we must also note that we can have laboratory experiments. We can also have field experiments. Those two are quite possible. It's possible to have either one of those two. But ultimately, an experiment is controlled within certain conditions. And usually the objective, which we can also do in a survey, is to determine if an independent variable, if manipulated, can affect a dependent variable. Yeah, an independent variable, if manipulated, sometimes can affect a dependent variable. The objective always is to test a hypothesis. Again, look at that article on multitasking. It's a good example of an experiment type of research. So some of the basic issues with experimental design is that you have manipulation of the independent variable. So take an example. Let's take an example. If we have a hypothesis that says your degree of happiness depends on your salary scale. Okay, so then maybe someone will do an experiment and test the degree of happiness of certain people who are on a lower salary scale and those on a higher salary scale. And if you see that once that variable is manipulated on lower salary scale and higher salary scale, and see if it affects degree of happiness. So we want to see that if we manipulate this independent variable, does it affect the dependent variable? So the dependent variable in our very rudimentary example is degree of happiness. Yeah, that is the dependent variable. So again, let us think in terms of IT and ICT. If you look at the term theory, where we see that the variables that affect adoption, ease of use and usefulness. Ease of use and usefulness. Term goes even further and says even gender. Gender affects adoption, where term puts an assumption saying that women will adopt a system if they perceive it easy to use, and men will adopt it if they perceive it useful to use. So you can turn those into independent and dependent variables and carry out a test, either a field test or a laboratory test. Now, these independent variables are assigned to subjects or test units. Yeah, if you look at the multitasking article, it gives a good example of the subjects or participants. But this normally, because it's laboratory, they're called test subjects or test units. Sometimes they may be aware, sometimes they may not be aware. Now, with experimental design, there's always the issue of control over extraneous variables. There are variables which may intervene and affect the dependent variable. So take the example of the issue of low salary scale and degree of happiness. You may find somebody who's in a low salary scale but has a high degree of happiness, not because of the low salary scale, but maybe this person has other things in their life that make them happy. For example, the person may be happily married, the person may have healthy children, or the person may have religion or some kind of faith system which gives them an optimistic view on life, even with a low salary scale. So all those are referred to as extraneous variables, which will affect the dependent variables, and that they may also change results. So usually with the experimental research design, we have to control these extraneous variables. So experimental design, we would have something, let's say like what we see here on this slide, where we have a control group and we have the experimental group to try and control those extraneous variables, where we would say that this particular control group, we would put all the extraneous variables to see if to see their effect, and then the experimental group where we remove them to see if we remove them, that is the hypothesis true or false. So we have the test units or the test subjects. Those are the people whose responses we measure. Their responses are what we measure. So again, I'll take you to the multitasking group where they were measuring the subjects in a lab, where they put sensors on the brain waves of the subject to see how well they responded to maybe touching a screen or listening to music or things like that. Now, as I said earlier, you can have either a laboratory test or a field, a laboratory experiment or field experiment. So with a laboratory experiment, you have low realism. That means the reality is highly controlled. Secondly, those interfering variables are also less. So there's high control and there's low cost. And it's also for short durations. Participants are normally aware of what is going on. Now, on the side of field experiment, you have reality is high. The real world is more felt or realized. You have more external variables that will interfere with your subjects. There's less control, high cost, long duration, and sometimes the subjects are unaware of what is going on. So most of the time, this research, sometimes some people may think of it as being unethical because people are not told that they are participating in a research. But yeah, sometimes it could be necessary to determine certain things. Any question on experimental research method?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, please.
Wouldn't involving people in, say, research without their consent breach, say, data protection guidelines and stuff like that, regulations in that line?
Now, if anyone is doing that kind of research, they first of all need to get anything that involves human participants. They need to get approval from what they call them research ethical bodies. I think in Uganda we have the it's under the is it science and technology body, the science and I forget the name, but that's where you need to seek for permission. That's one. Two, it also depends on on the subject that is being researched on. If it is something that is going to is intrusive, yeah, if it is something that is intrusive, then automatically that's where the body comes in and stops you. That's one. Two, there's also the question of when you're reporting any research, when you're reporting, we normally don't say, for example, if I'm doing research, I wouldn't say, while I was doing research, Emmanuel Kasozi said this or did this. Yeah. We protect the participants by hiding their identity. That's one. Then also the other thing also is also the significance of the research that is being done. If it is the findings are highly, how did I say, they are going to lead to something greater, something that is of significant society. That's where the research body, ethical body, can allow one to go ahead and do their research, even when the participants may not be aware. Jude, you have a question? Jude, you have a question? Your hand is up.
Doctor, what do you mean by laboratory experiments?
Laboratory experiments, okay. Let me give an example. Let us say we want to determine determine usability of e-learning systems, specifically open source systems. We all know open source systems are not usually market oriented. They are usually developed out of movements, open source movements and certain political movements. So they are not usually developed for the user, and we want to determine usability. So let us say we get a number of participants, we put them in a computer lab, and we have several e-learning systems where we take them through instructions of using, and we measure their responses, and we can even ask for them to fill out how they feel about something, about usability. We have several questions. That is a highly controlled, that is a laboratory experiment, because you brought participants, you brought them in a computer lab, and you asking them to go through a system, let's say Moodle. You ask them to move from point A to point B, from logging in to accessing a course unit, to accessing content, to maybe going through a quiz and things like that. And then you take them to another open source system, maybe Google Classroom, and you do the same thing. You go through the same steps, and you can maybe video record them to see their level of how the movements on the screen, how easy it is for them to move through. And then also you can have a questionnaire at the end where you ask them to state ease of use and usefulness and things like that. Now, that is a typical laboratory laboratory experiment. Now, it's quite different if you get the system and let's say give it to an active class, maybe to Sheba and her class, or you give it to Mr. Kasozi and his class, or you give it to Mr. Muchake and his class. That is a field experiment where you're asking them to use the system and give you feedback. Because now you're asking them to use it you're asking me to use it with my poor internet connection, maybe with my funny laptop, which maybe is not working very well. Maybe on the other side, there is Emma who's using it with a high-end laptop and high internet speed, is using fiber and so on and so forth. So that you see that those two become different cases. One is in an actual live context class, and the other one you'd use it maybe in a computer lab where you have controlled internet. All the users are using computers with the same specs, same internet speeds, and maybe you select users with the same literacy levels. Do you see that? Am I making sense? Am I?
Yes, doctor, I've understood.
Okay. Okay, then let's move now to research methods that are more qualitative in nature. The first is ethnography. Yeah. So ethnography is when we are studying the culture of people. The culture of people. We're studying people in relation to their culture. Yeah. And this particular research seeks to understand the human behavior in relation to culture and social context. In relation to culture and social context. So many times it is studying people within a group, a certain social group. Now, one may say, for us in IS, this will not make any sense anywhere. Organizations have culture, okay? Organizations have culture. An example, I think I gave you the example of the academic culture is very different from a purely commercial or private culture. I gave you the example of a time when I was in Africa Online where a system was implemented. And because this was a purely private and commercial company, those heads that rolled, those who were not needed were immediately fired. Come to an academic environment where you have people who argue, people who can argue on an academic and PhD levels. There are people who you can't fire. For example, if you go to a public academic institute like Makerere, there are people who can't be fired. Simply, they can't be fired at all. Certain professors, you simply can't fire them. You simply have to wait for them to retire when they are, maybe they become senile. Let's put it that way. A professor at 70 is still a professor, and that person will still be valued. You can't fire them. And if that professor says, I will not use a system, he or she will not use it, and there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah. So those are two different cultures. So normally ethnography is used to study history, religion, politics, and the environment. So again, if you're going to study the environment or the culture of certain people and how it affects a system, or how maybe there are some organizational politics that come into a certain situation, then it is important. Here, the data we collect, unlike, remember when we said quantitative, when we're talking about numbers, it's things that we see, things that we taste, things that we hear. We use all our senses as we collect data. The perceptions we get as we talk to people. Some limitations with ethnography. Sometimes the researcher may bury himself or herself within a certain research and may lose focus, may lose objectivity, okay? Or in other cases, there are some cases where they argue that it's not possible for a researcher to truly understand the situation unless they are going through it. I'll give you an example. There was a researcher who went to prison with the intention of trying to understand what it feels like to be in prison. But when that researcher was leaving the prison, one of the inmates told her that, you see the difference between you and me. You can't understand how I feel because for you, you're going. You leave, but me, I'm not leaving. I'm here until the end of my life. So this inmate was basically saying, it's not easy for you to understand because you will leave this situation. So there are certain limitations where you may not completely understand as we assume we would understand. Any question with ethnography? Any question? No? Let's move to action research. So action research, we've actually seen a paper which uses this research method. So this particular research method is mostly used in the field of education. Yeah, actually, if you go to the Faculty of Education, I think that's the research method they primarily push for. But we have actually seen it can be used in the field of IS. We've actually seen that it's possible to use it in the field of IS. This particular research involves practitioners. So the researcher becomes actively involved in in what is being researched. So action research has two sides. It has the practical side. By the practical side, we mean we are studying a practical a problem that actually exists. We saw that with the action research paper that we went through at the beginning of this session, where there was a problem where the senior management acknowledged that they had an issue with collaboration, and they had an actual existing problem. So usually action research deals with an actual existing problem within a specific context. Then, because of that particular problem, there's a participatory activities that begin to happen. We want to make a change with this practical problem that we have seen. We want to make an actual change. But as we make the change, we carry out observations. We want to see how the context is responding to the solution that we have brought about. So the article that I gave you gives you a perfect example of action research and how we derive results from it. So action research involves, one, identification of an area of focus, something where we need to focus on. We develop an action plan. So as we develop an action plan, we then collect data as we carry out our action plan. We collect data. As we collect data, we may notice certain changes. We may go back and revisit, we may go back and revisit our research area and re-edit it or just tweak it a bit more, which may take us back to our plan of action. Now, as we notice, as we're doing this, this is an iterative process. We keep going back as we identify the problem, we develop the action plan, we implement, we observe, we may decide to rework the solution, but in the whole time we're carrying out observation, the whole time we are implementing our action plan, we are collecting data, and this data we collect, we later on analyze, interpret, and report back, or rather report to the research community. Yeah. So an example, practical example of action research, I would point you to that article that we just went through today. That would be a good example to see action research in action, should so to speak. Any question on action research? Please note that for all these methods that I'm pointing out, I've also included articles which explain them further on Moodle. Any questions so far? Let me look to the chat room. Maweje says you're finding it difficult to hear me. Is that the case for everyone?
No. We can hear you, Doctor.
Okay. Alice, you have a question.
Thank you, Doctor. I needed to just get clarity on whether the use of, or rather development of an artifact is an example of actual research.
No, it's not. The article, development of an article, we're going to see the research method actually that is involved with development of an artifact. I'm going to come to that particular research method, but you may develop a solution, and that takes one research method, and then when you are implementing it and studying, you may use action research itself. So one of the things Alice we may note is that we may use more than one research method as we carry out our research. Take the example of that article of action research. They actually used two research methods. They used case study, they used action research. Yeah. So for many of you, you may develop an artifact like a framework or an application. You're going to use one, design science, and then two, you may use case study. But Alice, I'm going to come to the research method that specifically deals with development of artifacts in a few slides that are coming. Alice, have I answered your question?
Yes, thank you. I'll re-listen to this so I can understand action research more then.
Okay, so action research is basically seeing a practical problem, like for example, the groupware application article, there's a practical problem, but there is a research problem somewhere which talked about the working forces within an organization. Now, you notice with these particular researchers, they didn't develop Lotus Notes. Yeah? Alice, you note that they didn't develop Lotus Notes. It was already existing. They simply implemented it in a case study. Alice, have you got what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I understand that. Thank
they
you,
actually
Dr.
didn't develop Lotus Notes. They simply implemented it. If they had developed it, then design science would have come in as a research method. But they didn't develop it. They simply implemented it within a context. So for them, they didn't develop an artifact. If you're developing an artifact, let's say like a system, an application, or a framework or a model, then we would say you use design science. But if you're simply implementing and studying the context, then you'd say I'm using action research.
I get the difference. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, then let's move to our next research method, which is case study. Now, many of us have used this and we probably didn't know that we used it. So the case study is when we want to intensely study a particular situation, an individual, a small participant pool. For example, the action research study, they actually used case study research method because they used a New Zealand organization. That was a case study. So, and from that study, they drew conclusions. Yeah, but only about that participant or group within a specific context. So if you want to study particular individuals or a certain group of people, then you use a case study. So you can go back again to that article. It will show you an example of a case study, that one of action research. The other I've already told you in the research that I did for my PhD, I was studying a particular group of people in India, but more specific in the healthcare context. So there I was just focused on a group of people, a small group of people, to study them in relation to mHealth and sustainability, in relation to mHealth and sustainability. So that was one case study area. So someone may say, my research area my case study is a university, maybe specifically UMU. Another person may say, for me, my research, I think it was it Ogola who was looking at World Bank regulations and fintech. Yeah, that is also one case study area. Another person may say, I'm looking at at government and specifically maybe Ministry of Health or Ministry of Finance. That is another example of one specific case study. So far, have you understood? So far, we're still going ahead with case study. So far, we understood about case study. We're studying intense study of an individual or a group or a pool of people or a certain specific context. We may be studying business processes within a specific context. Yeah?
Look, please.
Have we understood there? Have we understood that point so far?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So case studies typically examine the interplay of variables. So we are trying to understand, if you look at that action research article, we're trying to understand something. We're trying to understand a situation, to have a complete understanding of a situation. Now, we can already tell that case study is typically qualitative in nature. Yeah. So it is unlike the more statistically based studies, because here we are intently studying one particular area. We're trying to go deep so it is we're being rich in content. We are probably going, and here we're going to look at, for example, the different data types that we'll have. So you find somebody is getting people's perceptions, people's views, experiences, ideas. So we're getting richness of data rather than quantity of data. Now, normally with a case study research method, we have what we call triangulation. Yeah, we have what we call triangulation. A person may decide to observe, then in observing has in-depth interviews, and then may decide to have an online survey to ascertain that what they observed and what they had in interviews, actually, they can get it from all participants within the case study. This is referred to as triangulation. And it is one of the ways we try to have validation of our data with qualitative research, where we try to use several methods, collection methods, to try and ensure that truly the variables that I've observed from my participants and I had from the interviews, when I interview all of them, it's the general feeling. Yeah, this is what is referred to as triangulation, or one of the ways we try to validate our data in qualitative research, when we try to use more than one source of collecting information. So one of the reasons why we try to do this is to have a robust picture, a rich picture in the information we have collected. Yes, please, Ogola, you have a question?
Well, yes, doctor, if you could just go back to the previous slide briefly under triangulation.
Yes.
So does that mean the population you're using for interviewing and even surveying, is it the same groups that you're still working with to further validate, or
yes,
in this case you're using another sample?
No, it's the same group. It's the same group of people. Now, let me give you an example. Let us say you observe people using participants using a system. You may observe certain things. Okay, let me give you a practical example of the research I did. I observed participants who had difficulty in using the mobile phone. Then I went ahead and interviewed people on a few people. Of course, I didn't interview all of them. I interviewed, because you spend some time talking to somebody. Now, what I did for all VHTs, all the VHTs who I observed, I gave them a questionnaire, not an online questionnaire. Of course, it was administered face-to-face. For all of them, I gave them a questionnaire. Now, I didn't necessarily interview all of them, but they had been part of the observations that I had done. Okay, so they were within the same case study, people within the same case study, but I didn't interview all of them. And what I had observed with some, I wanted to ascertain with all of them if it was true. Ogola, have you got my point?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so it is still a qualitative study, but you have administered a questionnaire within the same case study area. Now, if we try to compare the case study area and other qualitative, the case study research and other qualitative methods, here we have the case study. Yeah, here we have our case study here. We can apply ethnography, meaning somebody can come and use ethnography, spend time with these people to truly understand them. Okay. At the same time, the person can try to study a phenomena within this case study area. For example, the example of the action research article, where they were trying to truly understand that are there working forces within an organization that will assist an application that has been implemented within the organization. That was a phenomena. So this phenomena can be studied within the case study area, the case study itself. Okay. So in other words, case study can be done in conjunction with other research methods. It's not normally done on its own. It's done in conjunction with other research methods. We shall also see that when it comes to design science, a method that is particular to IS and ICT